Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist congregation at Willamette Falls. It is good to be together online today. It is good to be in the company of one another, even though we are not in the same building. I invite you to find a chalice or a candle, and today I also invite you to get a little cup or a bowl with some water and some salt for a ritual that we'll be doing later on in our service. So I invite you to find a candle to light with us, and some water and some salt. And then I invite you to join us in our chalice lighting statement. Whoever you are, wherever or whatever you come from, you are welcome here, where we are invited into connection and inspired to spiritual growth. Let us leave this hour together, refreshed anew, ready to ignite action for justice in the wider world. Our opening words this morning are from Kathleen McTeague. And in this situation, the home that we speak of is our congregation, our virtual home, even though we are not in the same building. Into this home, we bring our hunger for awakening. We bring compassionate hearts and a will toward justice. Into this home, we bring the courage to walk on after hard losses. Into this home, we bring our joy and gratitude for ordinary blessings. By our gathering, we bless this place. In its shelter, we shall know ourselves blessed. Come, let us worship together. Our opening hymn this morning is number 306, Sing of Living, Sing of Dying. And we thank Allison for putting together our slides so we can all sing together from our homes this morning.
Sing of living, sing of dying, let them both be joined in one, parts of an eternal process, like the ever-circling sun. From the freshness of each infant, giving hope in what is new, to the wisdom of the aged, deepened by a longer view, open to a deeper loving, open to the gift of care, searching for a higher justice, helping others in despair. Through the tender bonds of living in a more inclusive way, we are opened more to suffering from the losses of each day.
Our time for all ages today is a Middle Eastern story called The Sign of the Tassel. Down the street and around 7 corners, a woman and a man were married. They loved one another very much, but shortly after the wedding, the woman was sorry to discover that her husband often came home in a foul mood. One thing or another happened during the day that made him grumpy or angry. He carried this burden home with him, and he was not shy at all about sharing it with her. This cannot go on, thought the woman. She contemplated what to do with it until finally she said one day, "Husband of mine, I know that your work is difficult and causes you grief some days. And I've noticed that on those days you tend to come home angry." Her husband nodded, and she continued, "Husband, I think things would go better if you could warn me before you got home on the days that you were angry. Then I can take your bad humor into consideration and treat you more carefully." He liked the idea. And he thought for a moment. He said, "I wear my red fez every day." And of course he did. It was a gorgeous hat. He said, "I could flip the long black tassel that hangs to the side over to the front of my fez, and then you would know and could take my bad humor into consideration." "Yes, why not?" said the wife with enthusiasm. And then she added with just a little hesitation, the only thing is that sometimes I am angry too." He nodded as she continued. "So I think it would only be fair to you if I also warned you with a sign when I am angry. I have a beautiful white apron that I rarely use. Perhaps I should wear it on the days when I am also feeling cranky." "Why not?" said the husband. "Then I can take your anger into consideration too." And so they adopted the plan. The very next day, everything seemed to go wrong for the husband. And as he walked home, his anger grew with every step. By the time he rounded the corner on their street, he was furious. But when he reached their house, he remembered the plan and he thought, "Okay, I know what I have to do. I have to turn my tassel in front. Can you all take your tassels and turn them into the front?" The woman had been anticipating her husband's arrival and was looking out the window. When she saw the tassel, what do you think she did? She ran and put her apron on. The husband opened the door, and when he saw the white apron, he thought, "Oh no, it will never do for both of us to be angry. We might come to blows or something." And so he quickly flipped the tassel back around to the side of his elegant red fez. He did his very best to be pleasant and to treat his wife with kindness and compassion. She also managed to be kind, and they had a lovely evening. A few days later, the same thing happened. He was angry, but caught himself in time before he got home and flipped his tassel around. And the woman, as soon as she saw his fez, she put her apron on. When he saw her apron, he rearranged his tassel, and they managed to be perfectly pleasant with one another again. The same scenario with the tassel and then the apron, and the tassel and then the apron happened over and over and over again. Finally, the husband said, "It is very strange. Every time I come home angry, you are angry too." "It is strange indeed," replied the woman, "but it is good that we are able to put our anger aside." And then she added, "We human beings are cursed with tempers, but we are also blessed with wisdom. Maybe we could both agree to end our bad habit of being angry and decide instead just to be kind and compassionate to each other." "That would be wise," said the man. And that is what they did. We are now blessed to have our worship associates back with us again. And this morning, Nancy Downey is bringing a reflection. Nancy.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be back here. The need for ritual and remembrance seems to be an essential part of being. I was going to say an essential part of being human, But it is much larger than that. A salmon returns to spawn in the creek where she was born years before. A sea turtle builds her nest on the same remote island beach where she hatched. Your dog knows the precise time each day when a walk and dinner should occur and doesn't let you forget it. Ritual and remembrance are part of the circle of life. Of course, human cultures have countless diverse ways of celebrating heritage and spirituality. Just look at the long list of courses offered by the anthropology department of any university. But I don't have to look any farther than my own nuclear family to see how different people's needs for and expressions of ritual and remembrance can be. There are only 4 of us, but we represent quite an interesting continuum. At one end of the spectrum is our son Ken. From the time he was very young, he has had little interest in ritual celebrations of life's milestones, such as graduation ceremonies. He wants nothing to do with organized religion or pretty much organized anything. He was married in his yard wearing jeans with his friend officiating and the dogs as attendants. But he did get married. Many of his temperament might have seen no need for that legality. Because he was such a free-spirited child, he probably needed the stability of our family more than his more conventional sister did. His favorite teddy bear still sits on a shelf in his house. There is a doggy cemetery in his yard where he honors and visits his 4-legged friends who have crossed the Rainbow Bridge. He has kept up with more long-term friendships than the rest of us combined. And tucked away in a drawer are letters his father wrote to him when he was a teenager, and 35 years of J.R.R. Tolkien calendars that I have given him every Christmas since he was 12. I guess I'm next. I'm a pretty good UU. I would say that I'm more intellectual than spiritual. I prefer a good reading or a sermon to lighting candles. But I find meaning and comfort in ritual and remembrance too. I don't take any religion literally, but I believe in the power of myth. I like the King James version of the Christmas story, and when I go to a funeral, I want to hear, "In God's house are many mansions." I want to sing Spirit of Life at least every other Sunday. I like history. I know how meaningful Tennessee Waltz is to a 95-year-old World War II bride living in a nursing home. I have a little box of special mementos, my mother's 1950s string of pearls, my father's Eagle Scout insignia, my own high school orchestra senior pin. When I was growing up, we had an old stained tea kettle. Whenever we did the dishes, my father would tell me to dry it with a paper towel so I wouldn't stain the cloth dish towel. He's been gone since 1986, but when I clean my old corroded baking tray, I often hold it up a la Kunta Kinte and Mufasa and then dry it with a paper towel. My husband Rob is next in line. He was a Navy officer, and he does well with organization, structure, ceremony, and ritual. He's interested in genealogy and has been the family historian. One of his quarantine projects was to sort and organize 50 years of family photos. Surprisingly, he's not much for holidays, probably because he senses that many have turned into obligatory Hallmark occasions, and much of the meaning has been lost or obscured. He does not believe most of the Bible literally either, but he takes great comfort in traditional words of Scripture and in the real, original words of old mainline Protestant hymns. Then there's our daughter Melanie. She's a mathematician and a computer programmer and a strong advocate for women in STEM careers. She is also a minimalist and doesn't save many things as remembrances, but she has a profound need for ritual. She was a UU for many years and quite active at First Church, but she craved a ritualistic dimension of spirituality that she personally wasn't getting there. She was hired as a professional singer by Capella Romana. At first it was just a music gig and a downbeat and a paycheck. But through singing with them, she became increasingly attracted to the rituals of Orthodox Christianity and the comforting, mesmerizing repetition of Byzantine chant. Those things spoke to her spiritually, in a way that intellectualism and social activism could not. She joined the Orthodox Church and is now a chanter at her parish. Ritual and remembrance have many faces and voices. If we open our eyes and ears, we will see and hear the ones that show themselves to us and speak to our own minds and hearts.
Thank you, Nancy. Today, we take up a collection for the Hope Food Pantry. We do this like everything else we're doing these days virtually, and so I invite you to send in a check with Hope in the memo line or to go to UUCWF.org. Go down, scroll down the entire first page to the bright yellow donate button, and when you get to that button, when you click that button, there will be options for donating to Hope Food Pantry. And so I invite you to do that at some point today as part of your spiritual practice. We have some joys and sorrows. You are invited to put more in the chat if you would like. Of course, we begin with our sorrow for George Floyd, his friends and family and community, African Americans throughout the United States and their allies who are so frustrated and angry at the inhuman treatment that has been happening for so long. We also hold Rob Downey's brother, Ron, who has entered hospice care in Florida. He has been estranged from his family for a long time, and we hold them all in this difficult time. John Jagger is having surgery tomorrow to fix a hernia. We hold him and Sharian in our love and prayers. And are there more sorrows in the chat?
Couple of joys.
Okay. COVID-19 per capita rates are the highest in the Navajo Nation. They need our support in the Hopi reservations. There was a woman who died at the Oregon City Fred Meyer on Friday when Danielle was shopping, and her thoughts go out to the family and friends of that woman. And we do have some joys. Happy anniversary, Mari and Ron. 21 years, that's impressive. And Mary says, even though she lives in Bellingham, she gets to host Sisters this Thursday evening. There's some good things about this virtual existence of ours, aren't there? And we get to celebrate Michelle Stanley's birthday today. Happy birthday, Michelle. And Danielle's heart goes out to the Anderson family who lost their grandma on Friday. Oh, I'm so sorry. And happy 8th birthday to Cullen. Okay, I think we need to sing happy birthday to Michelle and Cullen. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Michelle and Cullen. Happy birthday to you. And happy birthday to Alex Tuggle, who is 20. Happy birthday, Alec. I'm sorry, Alec, not Alex. The screen print is small. All right. And like we do in our religious education classes, we pour the water of community around our joys and sorrows. We put one more stone in to remind us of all of those joys and sorrows that remain unspoken in our hearts. And we pour the water of community over these to remind us that we do not carry these alone. We are held. Also, I had forgotten a joy. I'm sorry, I had gone and moved to the screen, and I forgot the one that I had here, which is that Greg Penner is very excited to have his first post-COVID-19 real job, and he spent Wednesday location scouting. And so, Greg, we're so happy for you that you can get back to doing what you love. Will you pray with me? Spirit of life and love, this is a time of stress. It is a time when people are raising their voices against injustice. Injustice that has gone on far too long. Injustice that continues to this day. We are grateful for all of those wonderful things in our life that keep us going. And Spirit of Life, remind us to use that joy, to use community, to use hope, to bend the arc of the world more towards justice. That everyone be safe, that everyone thrive, that everyone be treated with the dignity that we demand as human beings. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen. Our reading today is Ministry from Baby Suggs in Toni Morrison's Beloved. When warm weather came, Baby Suggs, holy, followed by every black man, woman, and child who could make it through, took her great heart to the clearing, a wide open place cut deep in the woods, nobody knew for what, at the end of the path known only to deer and whoever cleared the land in the first place. In the heat of every Saturday afternoon, she sat in the clearing while the people waited among the trees. After situating herself on a huge flat-sided rock, Baby Suggs bowed her head and prayed silently. The company watched her from the trees. They knew she was ready when she put her stick down. Then she shouted, "Let the children come!" And they ran from the trees toward her. "Let your mothers hear you laugh," she told them, and the woods rang. The adults looked on and could not help smiling. Then, "Let the grown men come," she shouted. They stepped out one by one from among the ringing trees. "Let your wives and your children see you dance," she told them, and ground life shuddered under their feet. Finally, she called the women to her. "Cry," she told them, "for the living and the dead, just cry." And without covering their eyes, the women let loose. It started that way, laughing children, dancing men, crying women, and then it got mixed up. Women stopped crying and danced. Men sat down and cried. Children danced. Women laughed. Children cried until exhausted and riven, each and all lay about the clearing, damp and gasping for breath. In the silence that followed, baby Suggs, holy, offered up to them her great big heart. She did not tell them to clean up their lives or go and sin no more. She did not tell them they were the blessed of the earth, its inheriting meek or its glory-bound pure. She told them that the only grace they could have was the grace they could imagine, that if they could not see it, they would not have it. Here, she said, in this here place, we flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet in the grass. Love it hard. Our doxology today is Spirit of Life, and I invite you to sing.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. The shape of justice, roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
In her book, The Heart of a Family, Meg Cox tells the story of a family sitting down to dinner. 2-year-old Rebecca was in her high chair, along with her mom and her dad and her big sister around the table. The family was passing food around and noticed that Rebecca was starting to cry. They couldn't figure out why. She didn't seem sick or in pain. The food in front of her was something she liked. No one could figure out why she was crying until suddenly they realized that they hadn't said grace. As soon as they said grace, Rebecca calmed down. Life was as expected. Ritual is important to children. Nearly all families have rituals, whether it's hanging stockings and putting out cookies for Santa, or how birthdays are celebrated, or how much money the tooth fairy leaves per tooth. These are rituals that kids count on. But most families also have some kinds of smaller rituals as well, from how you say goodbye at school, to Friday night pizza and movies, to rubbing noses and saying, rabbit, rabbit. Rituals help kids feel confident that they know what's coming, that they belong to a family that shares an identity. We are existing in a strange time out of time. Family rituals may actually be strengthened. Families have fewer activities pulling them in different directions and may well have more time to sit down and share meals together. Games, puzzles, watching TV shows or movies together are things that are happening more now, and that is a lovely thing. But one of the hardest things about quarantine, especially quarantine because people are sick and dying, is that our rituals of death and grieving are on hold. People who are ill in nursing homes or are sick enough to be in hospitals are not allowed to have visitors. Sometimes at the absolute end of life, exceptions are made, but overwhelmingly people are suffering alone with only overworked nurses to hold a double-gloved hand. Nurses and other caregiving staff are trying to help folks stay in touch via phone or FaceTime, but it isn't the same. I am not arguing with the necessity of those precautions. This is a scary and deadly disease. But I am saying that one of the most difficult things about this is that our usual coping strategies of collective ritual and mourning are gone. And we're going to have to find some creative ways of dealing with our feelings. One of the most important things I do as a minister, and often one of the most rewarding, is to officiate memorial services. A good memorial service offers some closure for those closest to the deceased. It allows for the telling of stories, for the honoring of the life that is past, and at its best, to inspire others going forward. But the public service, while really important, is often secondary to the preparation, which for me involves gathering those closest to the deceased, often the spouse and partner or children, sometimes nieces and nephews or siblings, closest friends. But I will take 2 or 3 or 10 people in a room, and I'll say, tell me about your loved one. After the basic biography, I want to know how they spent their time. How did they celebrate holidays? What drove you crazy about them? What will you miss the most? Usually, even more than the large gathering, those smaller circles and the chance to tell stories with others who loved them is the action that brings closure to the families. But the larger gathering is the one that gives the wider community a chance to grieve and to remember. Grieving and remembering is important in the life of a community. Celebrating is also important. Not only are memorial services on hold, but weddings are being canceled or postponed. The gathering in front of family and friends to celebrate a wedding, to celebrate the birth of a child, to celebrate graduations and other markers is important. Yesterday, our director of religious education, Mary, and I drove flowers and chalices and cards around in a loop from Portland to Damascus to Milwaukee to West Lynn to Tualatin to Oregon City and back to Portland to celebrate our graduating seniors. The class of 2020 has lost so much in the way of rituals this year. From proms and graduations to last concerts and plays and sporting seasons, to the simple act of saying goodbye in person to beloved friends and teachers. It is just a huge bummer that these rites of passage have had to be canceled or postponed. But there is joy in how folks have come up with creative ways to celebrate their graduates. From the signs some high schools are putting up on their graduates' lawns, to smaller schools that are actually able to have graduation ceremonies with fewer than 25 people in the same space. Travis Albers' school is having everyone, all of the parents, have their own parking space in a semicircle around where the kids are sitting to graduate. John Kaczynski's Some Good News videos, where celebrities participate in proms and graduations via Zoom. We are finding creativity in these moments, and that is a wonderful thing. I encourage you, especially if your soul is feeling tender these days, to go looking for good news. People are being kind and creative, and I know I need to see and hear that. There is joy and hope and room for creativity That backyard wedding for 10 can be as meaningful as the grand party for 200. It is important to grieve. We are in a time of pandemic that we do not know how to mark. The New York Times published a list of 1,000 names from people who have died from the virus. 1% of the 100,000 people in the US who are known to have died from COVID-19 to date. It is a number that almost doesn't make sense to us. As many Americans as died in World War I and Vietnam put together, almost, or will be within about 2 weeks. In the New York Times article, each name had the person's age and hometown and a brief phrase culled from obituaries. In reading through it, I saw people as young as 5 and as old as 101. Worked at Home Depot, a lifetime Washington Huskies fan, police officer turned pastor, always put her children first. A reminder that all these people had rich, full lives that were cut short by a few months or many decades. In the online edition, text said, "The highly contagious virus has forced us to suppress our nature as social creatures for fear that we might infect or be infected. Among many indignities, it has denied us the grace of being present for a loved one's last moments. Age-old customs that lend meaning to existence have been upended, including the sacred rituals of how we mourn. Before, we came together in halls and bars and places of worship to remember and honor the dead. We recited prayers or raised glasses or retold familiar stories so funny they left us nodding and crying through our laughter. In these vital moments of communion, it could feel as though the departed were with us one last time, briefly resurrected by the sheer power of our collective love to share that closing prayer, that parting glance, that final hug." When we don't take the time to grieve, when we don't acknowledge what we have lost, things can fester. Right now, we are seeing things fester. From unacknowledged grief and injustice. We are seeing the results of white supremacy in our nation in so many places these days, from the increased death rates of people of color from COVID-19 to the recent and continuing murder and harassment of Black Americans at the hands of police officers and others. George Floyd is among the most recent. An African-American man in Minneapolis was killed by a police officer who put his knee on his neck as he was lying face down on the pavement, handcuffed, and remained with his full weight on Floyd's neck for over 8 minutes, while Floyd told the officer he couldn't breathe, while he stopped moving at all, while a medic asked if he could check his pulse, and that was refused, while another officer checked his pulse and found it absent, and for another full minute afterward. Floyd was detained because a convenience store called to report a counterfeit $20 bill, something that was likely completely accidental. The officer who killed him had had 18 complaints against him over his 19 years on the police force. Floyd's death as 3 other officers looked on and offered him no assistance, led to massive protests that began peacefully and eventually became violent. Riot officers arrested journalists, harassed medics, sent tear gas and flash bombs into groups of people of what once were peaceful protesters. And yes, protests in Minneapolis and in Portland and in other places turned violent. I do not condone violence, though I note that white sports fans who commit acts of vandalism are celebrating and blowing off steam. It is coming out that some of the people who were rioting and destroying property and setting fires were actually white supremacists or white anarchists infiltrating peaceful protests and trying to cause trouble. These were entirely different situations, and we cannot conflagrate the two. In Portland, Black community leaders were careful to note that people setting fires and looting were not acting in solidarity with the spirit of the protests. Reverend E.D. Mondane of the Portland NAACP stated, "To our non-Black allies, do not commit violence in our name." And one of the more horrific things that is coming out from people who were at protests is that it was not non-Black allies who were committing violence. In some cases, they were agitators, white supremacists, who were trying to make things worse. I haven't spoken about the president in a long time, and I know that some of you are happy about that. But a set of his tweets side by side that I saw on Friday said something important about the culture of white supremacy in this country. Many of you saw, and I am sure were appalled by white protesters with assault rifles who took over the State House in Michigan a few weeks ago, protesting the stay-at-home orders there, stating that they had the freedom to go where they wanted without wearing masks. Trump tweeted, "The governor of Michigan should give a little and put out the fire. These are very good people, but they are angry. They want their lives back again, safely. See them, talk to them, make a deal." In contrast, protesters in Minneapolis, tired of Black people being killed and the general lack or delay of justice in these situations, received the following tweet from the president. "These thugs are dishonoring the memory of George Floyd, and I won't let that happen. Just spoke to Governor Tim Walz and told him that the military is with him all the way. Any difficulty and we will assume control, but when the looting starts, the shooting starts." Now, I know that the officer who killed George Floyd has been arrested and charged with third-degree murder. I know that the woman who was caught on camera calling 911 in Central Park, saying an African-American man was threatening her and her dog, when really he just asked her to leash her dog, has lost both her dog and her job. And I know that 3 long months later, Ahmaud Arbery's killers have been indicted. The arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Some consequences for people who use their racial privilege to kill or harass African Americans is a tiny, tiny click in the direction of justice. But there are so many people in this country who consciously or unconsciously believe that the color of a person's skin makes them guilty until proven innocent. We live in a nation that was built on the backs of enslaved Black people, and one that continues to profit from the outrageously overrepresented Black and brown bodies that are housed in our for-profit prison systems. For every Derek Chauvin who was arrested for the death of an African American by overzealous policing, there are countless George Zimmermans who went free. We need ritual. We need action. We need justice for those whom justice has been too long denied. We need to understand that the problem is not simply a few bad apples, but a system that tells us and teaches us over and over again that Black people are scary and threatening because of the color of their skin. Tomorrow there is an interfaith moment of remembrance for everyone who has died from COVID-19. We will be marking that here on Zoom, the same number and password as our worship services, at noon tomorrow. We will gather for just a few moments and remember those who have died as part of an interfaith celebration that Sojourners is organizing. But today I invite you to get your cup or bowl of water and your salt. I invite you to stir some salt into the water with your finger. At Passover, Jewish people eat bitter herbs dipped into salt water to represent the bitterness of slavery and the tears of affliction. Today, I invite you to feel the salt on your skin, to taste, if you will, the grief and the pain of the generational trauma inflicted on Black and brown bodies, of the system that brought enslaved people to this nation to build the wealth and then maintained systems of segregation, of Jim Crow, of the school to prison pipeline that keeps many Black people from achieving their full potential. I invite you to remember and reflect on the nation that stole land from the native peoples who had lived here for centuries and then robbed them of not only their land, but their history and culture. Of this nation that was built as a nation of immigrants, but refuses to let our brown neighbors from the South in, pulling children from families, denying asylum to desperate people, many of whom have family here doing the work that white people don't want to be doing. These are not the tears of white fragility. They are the tears of white people's complacency in a racist system. A system that we didn't invent, but that we benefit from, often unwillingly. But in order to upend this system, white people need to do more than just wish it would go away. We need to have hard conversations with our friends and our loved ones about racism. We need to interrupt racist acts. We need to do our own work of understanding the legacy of white supremacy in this country. Reverend Erica Hewitt writes, "Our tears are not enough. Our anger isn't even enough. But our lamentation and rage drive us to act, to hold vigil, to make phone calls, to offer financial support, to interrupt harmful conversations, and to initiate uncomfortable conversations with those who would rather look away. May these tears be a beginning, and may we keep going. I invite you to take a breath with me. And another. And another. I am inviting you into a time of silence, a time of reflection, a time of figuring out the next right action to take. Suggs asked the people to cry and to laugh and to dance. Our lives as human beings need all three. Will you join us in our closing hymn, 311, Let It Be a Dance?
Let it be a dance we do. May I have this dance with you through the good times and the bad times too. Let it be a dance. Let a dancing song be heard. Play the music, say the words, and fill the sky with sailing birds. Let it be a dance, let it be a dance, let it be a dance. Learn to follow, learn to lead. Feel the rhythm, feel the need. To reap the harvest, plant the seed. Let it be child is born, the old must die. A time for joy, a time to cry. Take it as it passes by. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance we do. May I have this dance with you through the good times and the bad times too. Let it be a dance. Morning star comes out at night. Without the dark there is no light. If nothing's wrong then nothing's right. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance. Let the sunshine, let it rain. Share the laughter, bear the pain. And round we go again. Let it be a dance.
I invite you to extinguish your chalice at home as we extinguish ours. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Shug said that the only grace they could have was the grace they could imagine. That if they could not see it, they would not have it. What grace can you imagine? What world of beloved community can you truly envision? Go make it so. Blessed be, and amen.